and economic solidarity over economic inequality. But diplomacy, dialogue and mediation are not only our tools of choice, they are indispensable to sustainable peace in line with the principle and provisions of the UN Charter. Greater emphasis on these tools is urgently needed in today's Middle East. We deeply regret the continued loss of civilian lives across the region, including in Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, Israel or Yemen. The regional ramifications of the US-Iran escalation also saw civilian casualties in the Gulf countries, prompting us to express our full solidarity with the countries affected and to condemn Iran's indiscriminate military strikes. All actors must respect international law, including international humanitarian law. Civilian infrastructures must always be protected. We urge all actors to fully abide by the terms of the recent ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon and reject any additional conditions from Hezbollah. We will continue to support the Lebanese state sovereignty, territorial integrity and state-building efforts and reiterate the need for full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. A continued UN presence in Lebanon in the post-UNIFIL context remains essential to ensure the implementation of this resolution. We look forward to constructive discussions on the options presented to the Security Council by the Secretary General, and we reaffirm the EU's readiness to contribute to a post-UNIFIL presence in Lebanon in 2027. We note with regret that mediators have become targets of attacks during ongoing mediation processes. We need mediators able to take risks, keep doors and channels open. We must therefore actively protect the mediation space together. We commend our Qatari and Omani colleagues for the mediation roles in the region that, regrettably, sometimes come at a high cost. We also commend the engagement and mediation activities of the United States and Egypt, as well as Pakistan and other regional partners offering good offices. We stand ready to support the UN and regionally led initiatives aimed at reducing tensions and preventing further regional escalation. Durable stability will also require sustained political engagement and respect for international law by all sides, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. Recent tensions affecting maritime security and freedom of navigation in the Gulf further demonstrates that the region's crises quickly become global crises and illustrate the need for comprehensive and collective solutions. The deteriorating situation in Gaza underscores the urgent need for comprehensive political solutions based on the implementation of the two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. The New York Declaration provides a political framework to guide these efforts. The EU reiterates its call for the full implementation of Security Council 2803, which provides a framework for ending the conflict and addressing the humanitarian crisis. We support the mediators and the Office of the High Representative for Gaza in the efforts to achieve a permanent ceasefire, the disarmament of Hamas and other non-state armed groups, and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces, as outlined in a comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. The EU contributes to the implementation of this plan, including through our civilian crisis management missions, leading support for the Palestinian Authority, including in its ongoing reform, and in view of its return to Gaza, and we also do so through a Palestinian donor group. Colleagues, the EU stands ready to do more in all conflict theaters, in the Middle East and beyond. We are willing to put options on the table, to cooperate within our existing structures and to find ways to ensure mediation succeeds. Our approach remains firmly human-centered, focused on sustainable, locally owned solutions that address actual root causes rather than just symptoms. In line with our commitment to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, the EU strongly supports full, equal and meaningful participation of women in conflict settlement, prevention and mediation processes. The EU is currently supporting over 26 mediation processes globally, with a majority focus on the Levant and the Middle East and North Africa region. Our institutional architecture for peace mediation has grown steadily since 2011 and includes the good offices of the EU representative and EU special representatives and envoys, a dedicated mediation support team, and leveraging our mediation partnership with the UN, partner countries, think tanks and civil society. Our civilian and military crisis management missions represent another vital resource in our mediation toolbox. With 21 ongoing missions, including 12 civilian operations, we provide both security and political support to peace processes. These missions are open to third state participation, demonstrating our commitment to inclusive multilateral approaches. The EU's strength and added value lies in our ability to both engage directly and support others. We are the largest donor to UN mediation efforts and provide substantial grants to civil society, and we stepped in ourselves when we can add value. We recognize that in today's complex mediation landscape, no single actor can do it all. We must work as an ecosystem of peace, with each actor playing to their strength. One of the EU's mediation priorities is to form partnerships in this domain, and we take note of the work of the UN Group of Friends of Mediation, and will continue to work closely with the UN mediation champions and cross-regional partners. To conclude, with our historical experience, institutional architecture, operational readiness and financial commitment, the European Union stands ready to lend our support and experience as a mediation partner. Guided by the UN Charter and fundamental values and principles, we are willing to work with and support mediation processes to advance lasting political solutions in the Middle East and beyond. The path to peace is challenging, but with coordinated international effort, it remains achievable. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the European Union for their statement. I give the floor now to the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippines congratulates Colombia on its presidency of the Security Council and thanks it for convening this timely, open debate. At a time of deepening geopolitical divides, protracted conflicts, and worsening humanitarian crises, we are reminded that sustaining peace requires dialogue, diplomacy, trust building, and respect for international law. The Philippines remains firmly committed to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, including the peaceful settlement of disputes. This commitment is deeply rooted in our diplomatic tradition, including our role in shepherding the 1982 Manila Declaration on the peaceful settlement of international disputes. The Manila Declaration affirms that peaceful settlement is not merely a political aspiration, but a legal obligation. It also teaches that mediation is most effective when pursued in good faith, supported by political commitment, and adapted to the realities of each conflict. Madam President, recent developments across the Middle East underscore both the urgency and necessity of political solutions. In Palestine, mediation efforts have been indispensable in facilitating ceasefires, humanitarian arrangements, and discussions on post-conflict governance. Sustainable peace, however, will ultimately require a credible political horizon grounded in international law and the realization of the two-state solution in accordance with UN Security Council resolutions, with Palestine and Israel living side by side in peace and security with internationally recognized borders. In Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, continued diplomatic engagement remains essential to advancing inclusive political processes and laying the foundations for durable peace. Drawing from the lessons of the Manila Declaration, the Security Council can strengthen mediation efforts by investing more consistently in preventive diplomacy in the Secretary General's good offices before crises escalate. The Council should provide sustained political support to special envoys and mediation initiatives that preserve channels of communication, reduce miscalculation, and facilitate ceasefires linked to broader political purposes. The Council must also ensure that humanitarian considerations remain central to mediation efforts. Effective mediation can help secure humanitarian pauses, facilitate safe and unhindered humanitarian access, protect civilians, and restore essential services. These measures not only alleviate suffering but also build confidence among parties. Recent tensions affecting the Strait of Hormuz likewise demonstrate how regional conflicts can affect global supply chains, energy markets, and freedom of navigation. By supporting de-escalation, dialogue, and adherence to international law, the Council can help safeguard critical maritime routes, ensure protection of civilians, especially seafarers, and reduce risks to international peace and security in line with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. Madam President, the Philippines' experience in the Bangsamoro peace process demonstrates that deeply rooted conflicts can be transformed through patience, sustained engagement, and inclusive dialogue. Women, youth, religious leaders, civil society, and local communities all play meaningful roles in shaping and sustaining peace. Durable peace processes must be locally owned, inclusive, and responsive to historical, cultural, and political realities. Meaningful participation by affected communities strengthens legitimacy and improves prospects for implementation. In conclusion, the Philippines remains convinced that durable peace in the Middle East can only be achieved through political solutions. The Security Council, together with the United Nations and regional partners, must continue to support mediation, dialogue, and confidence-building efforts that reduce tensions, prevent escalation, and create lasting conditions for peace. Thank you.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of the Philippines for your statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. Malaysia congratulates Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of June. We appreciate the convening of this timely open debate. Malaysia remains deeply concerned by the escalation of military actions and retaliatory strikes across the Middle East. These developments undermine regional stability and run counter to the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition on the use of force under the UN Charter. Against this backdrop, Malaysia welcomes credible efforts towards ceasefire, a crucial step to de-escalate tensions and restore peace and stability to the region. All parties must avoid provocations or unilateral measures and prevent acts of hostilities that would endanger regional and global economy and energy security. Malaysia calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, cease hostilities, and abide by international law. And viable path to resolving conflicts and ensuring regional security. Mediation and dialogue must therefore be at the center of the Council's response. Chapter 6 of the Charter is clear. Disputes must be settled by peaceful means, including negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and good offices. Madam President, Malaysia recalls that Security Council Resolution 2788 calls for support to the Secretary General's mediation and preventive diplomacy efforts. In line with this commitment and as part of a broader effort to address the humanitarian impact of the crisis, we welcome the UN Secretary General's initiative to establish a dedicated task force to explore interim measures to address food insecurity and mitigate disruptions to agricultural supply chains. For mediation to succeed, unity within this Council is essential. A united Council raises the cost of rejecting mediation, while a divided Council risks losing the leverage that makes mediation work. The unanimous adoption of Resolution 2788 is an encouraging step in the right direction. Malaysia urges Council members to build on that unity to bring peace and stability to the Middle East. Madam President, to conclude, Malaysia reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism, the pacific settlement of dispute, and a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in the Middle East. The path forward must be restraint over escalation, dialogue over confrontation, and justice over impunity. I thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the representative of Malaysia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President. And I wish to start by thanking Colombia for convening this very important debate. Malta aligns itself with the statement delivered by and on behalf of the European Union, but I wish to make the following remarks in my national capacity. Madam President, Malta remains deeply concerned by the continued escalation of violence across the region and its devastating toll on civilians. The risk of wider regional spillover, which remains real, underscores the urgent importance of sustained mediation efforts. Mediation is not an optional tool. It is an indispensable pillar of conflict resolution. Today, more than ever, it must be strengthened, supported, and protected. As the United Nations Secretary General has rightly stressed, de-escalation and dialogue remain the only viable path forward in an increasingly fragile regional context. Madam President, I would like to highlight 4 points. First, to fully support the United Nations good offices and mediation capacities, and to stand behind the Secretary General and his envoys with one voice. Second, mediation cannot be fruitful if the affected populations remain vulnerable to the repercussions of the war. The figures presented by several reports on the deteriorating conditions being faced by those affected by conflict is a testament of the urgency for unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance. To this end, it is crucial that any mediation efforts need to be coupled with safeguarding open and efficient humanitarian channels, as well as the protection of humanitarian and medical personnel, in line with international humanitarian law. Third, to keep mediation inclusive and coherent, women and young people must have a meaningful seat at the table. Fourth, regional organizations also have a unique role to play in mediation and dialogue, and we continue to encourage close cooperation and the strengthening of existing partnerships between regional organizations and the Security Council. Mediation requires perseverance, consistency, and long-term political will. Madam President, in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, sustained engagement and mediation remain essential to alleviate human suffering, establish the minimum conditions required for meaningful political dialogue, and lasting peace. Malta remains steadfast in its support for a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. All mediation efforts should be firmly directed towards this objective. Across the region, recent ceasefire arrangements offer a welcome opportunity to transform the escalation into a broader political process. While the situation remains fragile in several contexts, these developments demonstrate the continued value of dialogue and mediation in advancing peace and stability. Instability in the region's sea lanes is no longer only a matter of navigational rights. We have reached a perilous point for the world's ability to feed itself. The Gulf is a critical hub for the movement of fertilizers and the energy inputs needed to produce them, and recent disruptions have already pushed up prices, slowed shipments, and risked missing key planting windows. The FAO and WFP caution that even brief shortages can depress yields for an entire season. When these supply lines falter, hunger rises, which is why de-escalation in these maritime corridors is not just a regional concern, but a global responsibility. In conclusion, Madam President, diplomacy, dialogue, and mediation are not only our tools of choice, but they are also indispensable to a sustainable peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for her statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of Armenia.
Madam President, I would like to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to the Colombian Presidency of the UN Security Council and His Excellency President Gustavo Petro for convening today's open debate on the role of dialogue and mediation in the Middle East at a time when the region faces unprecedented challenges. We are alarmed by the reports of renewed hostilities in the Middle East, as the shocks can go far beyond the region with negative consequences for global supply chains, global trade, transport connectivity, and sharp increase in prices of energy resources and critical goods. Armenia closely follows developments in the Middle East given the geographic proximity and millennia-old ties with the peoples and countries in the Middle East where sizable Armenian communities live. Madam President, the Republic of Armenia has consistently called for de-escalation, cessation of armed hostilities with the aim of providing durable political solutions through negotiations and dialogue. All parties to conflicts must abide by their obligations under international law. Under the UN Charter, the parties to any dispute are obliged to first and foremost seek a solution by negotiation, mediation, and other peaceful means of their choice. We would like to reiterate Armenia's support for achieving a peaceful, lasting, just, and comprehensive settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with the two-state solution. We would also like to stress the absolute necessity of protecting civilians, ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access, and upholding international humanitarian law as indispensable elements of any sustainable peaceful arrangement. We also reaffirm Armenia's consistent and full support for the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Syria. Syrian-led and Syrian-owned peace-building process is crucial to ensure peace both in Syria and the Middle East. In line with the age-old friendly relations between Armenia and Syria, we express our willingness to contribute to post-conflict recovery, reconstruction efforts, as well as to interreligious dialogue. Humanitarian situation in Lebanon remains of grave concern. Armenia commends the Lebanese government's efforts aimed at restoring stability in the country at these challenging times and reiterates its steadfast support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of friendly Lebanon. As a long-standing troop-contributing country to UNIFIL, Armenia is alarmed by the targeting and killing of peacekeepers in Lebanon, as 7 peacekeepers have been killed, with many others sustaining injuries since March 2026. Those responsible for attacks against the UNIFIL personnel and compounds must be held accountable. Madam President, the Republic of Armenia shares the aspiration of peaceful, stable, and prosperous future for the Middle East, and we will continue shouldering international efforts to this end. I thank you, Madam President.
Doy la gracia al
I thank the representative of Armenia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Fiji.
Madam President, Fiji thanks Colombia for convening this general debate under your presidency this month. 12 years before I was born, this organization passed Resolution 181. It authorized the creation of 2 states. One was created, one was not. 78 years later, this Council must finally decide to complete what the General Assembly began. The Palestinian people have waited long enough. A negotiated 2-state solution with Israel's security guaranteed and Palestinian sovereignty recognized is not a concession by either side. It is the only outcome consistent with the Charter and the only arrangement that serves the long-term security of both peoples. Fiji calls on this Council to move from affirmation to action. On the second matter before the Council, Fiji reaffirms its commitment to nuclear non-proliferation as a cornerstone of international peace, security, and sustainable development. The situation surrounding Iran's nuclear program underscores the importance of transparency, dialogue, and effective verification. On this question, and aligned with the position stated by President Trump, Fiji's view is unambiguous, that state must not be permitted to acquire nuclear weapons. This is not a partisan position. It is a regional security imperative. A nuclear-armed Iran would not stabilize the Middle East. It would compel this Council to consider extending nuclear deterrence to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and others across the region. That is the path towards proliferation, not peace. The Non-Proliferation Treaty exists precisely to prevent this outcome. This Council must enforce it without exception and without delay. On the Strait of Hormuz, this Council has already spoken. Its own resolution recognizes UNCLOS and the right of unimpeded transit passage through international straits. Fiji calls on this Council to enforce what it has already decided. Freedom of navigation is non-negotiable. The strait must remain open to the commerce of all nations, governed by law, not by threat. 3 issues, 3 decisions this Council has the authority to make. Fiji urges it to make them. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Fiji for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much, Madam President. The Dominican Republic wishes to thank Colombia for convening this open debate on a matter of high priority for international peace and security. We recognize the central focus on mediation and dialogue as essential tools to move towards politically sustainable solutions in the Middle East. We are very much concerned about the challenges in the region and the ongoing worsening of the humanitarian situation. These crises not only affect the populations directly impacted, but also generate significant global repercussions, including disruptions to food security, energy markets, and supply chains, disproportionately affecting developing countries. In this context, the Dominican Republic reaffirms the central role of preventive diplomacy, mediation, and good offices in full accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. We believe that the Security Council must redouble its efforts to strengthen mediation mechanisms, including sustained political support for the Secretary-General's envoys, the promotion of inclusive processes, and the establishment of international guarantees and credible verification mechanisms that can facilitate lasting ceasefires. We also underscore the urgency of ensuring the protection of civilians with full respect for international humanitarian law. There must be secure, safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access. Effective mediation must incorporate these elements as priorities, contributing not only to the de-escalation of tensions, but also to mitigating the human suffering, particularly in situations of protracted crises that are very complex. Madam President, international experience demonstrates that sustainable peace processes require inclusive, context-sensitive approaches based on building trust among the parties. In this regard, we highlight the importance of fostering complementarity among the United Nations, regional organizations, and member states, promoting synergies that strengthen the international mediation architecture. We also believe that energy security and freedom of navigation are key components of global stability. Dialogue and mediation can play a decisive role in reducing risks in these areas. In conclusion, the Dominican Republic reiterates its firm commitment to multilateralism and to the peaceful settlement of disputes. only through genuine political commitment, the strengthening of international mediation, and the promotion of inclusive dialogue processes will it be possible to advance towards lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of the Dominican Republic for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Iceland.
Gracias.
Madam President, let me begin by congratulating Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council and thanking you for convening this open debate. I express my appreciation to the Secretary General for his important statement. He raised several points that we hope will command broad agreement, especially on the importance of the United Nations good offices in mediating and mitigating the effects of conflict in the Middle East region. Madam President, the Middle East is experiencing multiple, often interconnected conflicts across the region. These conflicts not only fuel instability within the whole region itself, but also have far-reaching consequences, undermining political, economic, and social stability around the world. In the absence of peaceful resolution, we are left with confronting the devastating consequences of these conflicts, the loss of life, destruction, and humanitarian needs. We are also facing higher energy and food prices, along with the resulting insecurity and destabilizing effects it has across the globe, especially on its poorer regions. We reiterate our condemnation of attacks on civilians, civilian infrastructure, emergency workers, and UN peacekeepers and staff, remindful of the solemn memorial service last Monday. All parties to conflict must adhere to international humanitarian law. Madam President, let me begin with Palestine, where the situation in Gaza remains unacceptable and the promise of Resolution 2803 unfulfilled. Greater efforts are needed to deliver the peace and relief it pledged for Palestinians in Gaza. Humanitarian access remains severely restricted, with Israel continuing to impede the delivery of much-needed aid and the work of UN agencies and key international non-governmental organizations. Rather than implementing stages of withdrawal, Israeli forces, by their own admission, are occupying a larger territory of Gaza today than they did at the outset of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, the situation in the West Bank continues to deteriorate at an alarming rate. Settler violence and impunity is fueled and enabled by inflammatory rhetoric and permissive policy by Israeli authorities. Under these dire circumstances, calls for a two-state solution may almost seem futile, but it still remains the only viable path to sustainable peace and security. In Lebanon, the civilian population is once again the victim of vicious warfare between Israel and Hezbollah. We reiterate that Lebanon's territorial integrity and sovereignty must be respected and call for the full implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 from 2006. This includes withdrawing Israeli forces from South Lebanon. It is essential to build on the progress achieved under the current, albeit fragile, ceasefire agreement in order to advance toward lasting peace and stability. This is in Israel's as well as Lebanon's best interest. Syria, after 14 years of civil war, has emerged as a beacon of hope in the region. However, the road to peace-building, recovery and reconstruction is long and winding, and Syria will need sustained support from the international community and the UN. There is no shortage of challenges and potential threats from within and from outside. Syria's territorial integrity and sovereignty must also be respected. In Yemen, we see just how costly and devastating relapses in peace processes are for a population in dire need. We have welcomed efforts to extend the ceasefire between the United States and Iran and continue to call for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Regrettably, recent developments have moved in the opposite direction, with resumption of conflict further undermining prospects for de-escalation and dialogue, and this is deeply concerning. Iran's continued obstruction to freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is unacceptable and must stop. It not only presents a direct threat to the region, but world energy markets and global food security. International law, including the law of the sea and maritime law, must be respected. Madam President, Iceland was one of the 136 member states that co-sponsored Resolution 2817 3 months ago. We lament the Council's inability to take further decisive action on the matter. The Council remains deeply divided on several of the before-mentioned conflicts. Its inability to respond appropriately has meant states or regional organizations have in some cases filled the void, often unsuccessfully. The use or the threat of use of the veto power has in certain cases reinforced the impasse and obstructed its resolve. We should expect more from this Council. All its members must live up to their fundamental responsibility to maintain peace and security in the Middle East as elsewhere. Thank you.
Doy las gracias a la
I thank the representative of Iceland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Thailand.
Madam President, Thailand commends Colombia for its leadership as President of the Security Council and welcomes your initiative in convening this timely debate. My delegation offers 4 pivotal points for today's discussion. First, the protection of civilian and civilian infrastructure is a non-negotiable obligation under international humanitarian law. We must ensure the safety and dignity of civilians at all times. The effective protection can only be achieved by addressing root causes of the conflict in a comprehensive manner and ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Second, mediation and dialogue, driven by full ownership and good faith among parties concerned, are the only viable path toward lasting peace. The comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict stands as an example of mediation in action. Third, the UN remains central to mediation and preventive diplomacy. We emphasize the need for complementarity between UN and regional actors, such as the guarantors whose tireless engagement has been indispensable in maintaining the current ceasefire in Gaza. Thailand welcomes the recent implementation report of Security Council Resolution 2803 and recognizes the role of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza in supporting
international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. Early action to prevent escalation remains essential. Timor-Leste's own journey from conflict to peace demonstrates that the value of sustained international engagement, principled mediation, and national reconciliation is something that worth emphasize. Our experience affirms that peace becomes possible when dialogue is credible, inclusive, and responsive to the realities of affected communities. Instability in the Middle East carries consequences far beyond the region. It disrupts trade routes and supply chains, creates uncertainty in energy markets, fuels displacement, and undermines global economic resilience. For small, import-dependent developing countries such as Timor-Leste, these effects are felt acutely. Peace in the Middle East is therefore a matter of global concern. Madam President, Timor-Leste is deeply concerned by the continuing challenges facing humanitarian operations. Humanitarian assistance must reach civilians in need safely, rapidly, and without obstruction. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel and respect for international humanitarian law must remain central to all efforts aimed at the de-escalation of peace. Effective mediation must also be inclusive and context-sensitive, ensuring meaningful participation by other groups such as women, youth, civil society, and regional actors. Agreements are more likely to endure when they reflect the perspectives of needs of those most affected. Madam President, to end, as a nation that emerged from conflict through dialogue and reconciliation, Timor-Leste reaffirms that durable peace is built through political courage, inclusive processes, respect of human dignity, and adherence to international law. The Security Council must continue to support these principles in pursuing a peaceful and lasting future for the Middle East. I thank you.
Doy las gracias al representante.
I thank the representative of Timor-Leste, and I now give the floor to Guatemala. Thank you, Madam President. Guatemala thanks Colombia for convening this open debate, as well as for the concept note that guides our deliberations. We fully agree that the persistence of conflicts in the Middle East, together with the deterioration of the humanitarian situation, requires renewed collective efforts to advance sustainable political solutions. We appreciate the Secretary-General's timely assessment of current challenges and his emphasis on strengthening preventive diplomacy, mediation and dialogue as essential means of reducing tensions and building confidence. The region is facing a convergence of crises that transcend borders, disruptions to supply chains, impacts on food and energy security, and a troubling erosion of confidence in multilateralism. In this context, we would like to highlight 3 points. Firstly, the central importance of protecting civilians. We are deeply concerned by the high human cost of the conflict, including the loss of life among those who, through the United Nations and humanitarian action, are working on the ground to assist affected populations. Guatemala calls on all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law and to ensure safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access. Secondly, the need to strengthen and not replace the United Nations mediation architecture. We value mediation efforts undertaken at various levels, including regional initiatives which help create spaces for dialogue. In this regard, Guatemala considers it essential to reinforce the central role of the United Nations, particularly the leadership of the Secretary-General and his good offices, while promoting greater complementarity among initiatives. Experience demonstrates that the most sustainable processes are those that are anchored in a legitimate multilateral framework and supported by clear commitments and credible mechanisms. Thirdly, the importance of addressing the root causes of conflicts. Instability in the Middle East is deeply interconnected, and its repercussions, including impacts on freedom of navigation and global trade, require coordinated responses. Lasting peace will only be possible through inclusive political processes that respond to the historical and cultural realities of the region. Finally, Madam President, we reiterate that the Council must act with unity and determination. Guatemala is convinced that only through dialogue, preventive diplomacy, and a genuine commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes can we contribute to a horizon of lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you. I thank the representative of Guatemala for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to begin by thanking you for convening this timely debate. We are meeting at a time when conflicts across parts of the Middle East continue to cause immense human suffering, undermine development, and threaten regional and international stability. The effects of these conflicts extend beyond national borders, disrupting food security, energy markets, trade, and confidence in our collective ability to maintain peace and security. Our past struggles for self-determination in Southern Africa, including my own country, Zimbabwe, offer a clear lesson that lasting peace cannot be imposed or secured through military means alone. Sustainable peace is built through dialogue, compromise, and political solutions that address the root causes of conflict. Madam President, peace processes must begin early, before positions harden and violence escalates. Ceasefires are important, but they must create space for credible political processes that address grievances, rebuild trust, and lay the foundation for reconciliation. In that regard, my delegation underscores the urgent need to advance a just, lasting, and comprehensive solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We reaffirm our unwavering support for a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security, with internationally recognized borders consistent with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. The two-state solution remains the only viable path to achieving the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians and to securing lasting peace and stability in the region. My delegation therefore underscores the importance of preventative diplomacy, mediation, and the good offices of the Secretary General. The Security Council should invest as much political capital in preventing and resolving conflicts through dialogue as it does in responding to their consequences. Inclusion is equally essential. Peace agreements are more durable when they are owned by the people they serve. Mediation efforts must extend beyond armed actors to include women, youth, civil society, religious leaders, and local communities. Meaningful participation by women and young people remains vital, consistent with resolutions 1325 and 2250 respectively. Madam President, humanitarian action and political processes are mutually reinforcing. The protection of civilians, safe and unhindered humanitarian access, protection of humanitarian and medical personnel, and restoration of essential services are not only moral imperatives, they are confidence-building measures that help to create conditions for dialogue and peace. At the center of all efforts remain the dignity, safety, and aspirations of people affected by conflict. The Charter of the United Nations, particularly Chapter 8, recognizes the important role of regional arrangements in peaceful settlement of disputes. In the case of Southern Africa, the Southern African Development Community and the African Union demonstrate the value of regional organizations in mediation and conflict resolution. Their proximity, contextual understanding, and long-term commitment to regional stability complement the efforts by the United Nations. My delegation therefore encourages stronger cooperation between the United Nations and regional organizations in the Middle East, as well as greater coordination among mediators to avoid fragmented initiatives. As I conclude, Madam President, Zimbabwe, as an elected member of the Security Council for the 2027-2028 term, reaffirms its commitment to advancing peace through preventative diplomacy, dialogue, mediation, and multilateral cooperation. Dialogue remains the most sustainable path to peace. We will work constructively with all Council members to promote inclusive political solutions, protect civilians, and strengthen efforts aimed at the peaceful settlement of disputes in line with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam President. The Holy See delegation would like to thank Colombia for convening this important open debate. The Middle East is a region rich in history, culture, and faith. Its peoples have contributed immeasurably to human civilization. This region encompasses the Holy Land, with Jerusalem at its heart, a land sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike, with a spiritual significance that extends far beyond the region itself. Yet today, the region continues to be marked by violence, fear, and human suffering. Peace must always be built through dialogue, trust, and respect for the God-given dignity of every human person. As Pope Leo XIV insists, peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the gentle strength that rejects violence. In this regard, the delegation of the Holy See wishes to offer three reflections. First, there is no military solution to the crises in the Middle East. As Pope Leo XIV recently recalled, weapons may impose a temporary silence, but they can never build a genuine and lasting peace. The continuing suffering of civilians, the destruction of homes and places of worship, and the damage to essential infrastructure, as well as the grave humanitarian situation, make this painfully evident. These conditions demand renewed efforts toward an immediate cessation of violence and a credible political horizon capable of addressing the legitimate aspirations of all peoples involved. All states, especially those with influence in the region, bear a grave responsibility to support de-escalation and peaceful resolution. Second, preventive diplomacy and mediation require patience, political courage, and a willingness to engage. The cost of dialogue may appear high. The cost of its absence is invariably higher. Indeed, mediation is not merely a matter of managing crises, but rather the patient work of rebuilding relationships and restoring confidence. Third, every political solution must place the human person at its center. Political agreements cannot endure unless they address the legitimate hopes and needs of peoples. Peace is sustained not only by institutions alone, but also by communities capable of trust, solidarity, and hope. Therefore, supporting UN agencies and institutions that provide education, healthcare, and relief to displaced persons and refugee communities is indispensable. Madam President, it is vital to resolve all ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. In this regard, the Holy See urges an immediate end to the ongoing military escalation in Lebanon and calls for concerted efforts, patience, and diligence in pursuing a comprehensive and lasting peace, including addressing the situation concerning Iran. Furthermore, it is imperative that any aggression stops, that the dramatic humanitarian situation in Gaza is addressed, and that a path towards a two-state solution is paved. The peoples of the Middle East deserve better than to be stuck in a cycle of recurring crises. They deserve a future based upon justice, security, reconciliation, and hope. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See for his statement. And I now give the floor to the Maldives.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, President. I thank Colombia, the President of the Council, for convening this open debate. The Middle East has no shortage of mediation. It has a shortage of accountability for aggression and genocide. Across the region, mediation efforts by several countries have opened channels, pursued ceasefires, and tried to prevent wider war. The Maldives commends these efforts as the work of peace. Mediation succeeds only when parties choose peace over war. It cannot succeed when Israel treats dialogue as cover for aggression, kills negotiators, and then asks this council to call it security. That is the crisis before us. At the heart of the conflicts in the Middle East lies Israel's aggression and impunity. Against Palestine, Israel has sustained occupation, settlement, blockade, and genocide in Gaza. Against other countries, it has treated sovereignty as disposable. Its aggression has reached Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Qatar. Each strike left unanswered becomes permission for the next. 59 years ago, from 5th to 10th June 1967, war across the Levant and Sinai altered the map. Resolution 242 followed on 22nd November 1967. It spoke of territories, waterways, states, borders, and refugees. But it did not name the Palestinian people. That omission still sits inside every failed process. The Palestinian people were turned into a question. Their land was treated as a file. Their rights were deferred to another meeting, another process, and another delay. Israel lives inside that delay, expanding settlements, entrenching occupation, killing civilians, and defying this council. Neutrality in situations of injustice is choosing the side of the oppressor. So are diluted condemnation, appeasement, and delay. The Council cannot address mediation while ignoring Israel's aggression that makes mediation impossible. Across the region, Israel's aggression kills civilians, collapses essential services, and disrupts food, energy, supply chains, and navigation. Mediation, therefore, must be anchored in international law. It must protect civilians, ensure humanitarian access, include guarantees and verification, and never negotiate away Palestinian rights. A lasting peace requires an immediate and permanent ceasefire. It requires an end to occupation, settlement expansion, forced displacement, annexation, and blockade. It requires accountability for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. It requires reparations to Palestine, including restitution, compensation, and reconstruction with justice. The Maldives calls for the implementation of all relevant United Nations resolutions, compliance with the orders and opinions of the International Court of Justice, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Maldives calls on all member states to recognize the state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, and to support Palestine's full membership in the United Nations. Peace cannot be mediated by erasing Palestine. It cannot be sustained by rewarding aggression. The Middle East does not need another process that shelters impunity. It needs justice. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Maldives for your statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Mauritania.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to thank the Colombian Presidency of the Security Council for the month of June for holding this session at a critical juncture in the history of the Middle East, which is now facing significant challenges and deteriorating conditions. We therefore need today more than ever to redouble efforts and coordinate positions to rescue the region from this appalling reality that is deteriorating by the day. Madam President, my delegation reiterates its commitment to the United Nations Charter, international law, humanitarian international law, international resolutions, especially the principles of good neighborliness, the respect of the sovereignty of states, not interference in the internal affairs of states, maintaining international peace and security, and the settlement of disputes by peaceful means. These principles are the foundational parameters for Mauritanian foreign policy and for our relationships with other countries. We have repeatedly referred to those principles in international fora. Madam President, the multiple conflicts and crises in the world, especially in the Middle East, make us recall today, once again, the collective call in the preamble of the United Nations. I quote, "We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." End of quote. This call is the epitome of the Charter. Article 2, paragraph 3 stipulates that members of this organization shall settle their disputes by peaceful means in order not to endanger international peace and security and international justice. Article 33 stipulates that parties to any dispute shall first of all settle a conflict by peaceful means, including mediation and negotiation. Madam President, the Palestinian question is the core of the conflict in the Middle East, and the United Nations has made extensive effort to settle this dispute. Hundreds of resolutions were adopted by your August Council and the GA. Unfortunately, most of those resolutions have not been implemented, which perpetuated the conflict and expanded the conflict. The significant escalation in the Middle East that we have been witnessing for decades, the continued suffering of the peoples of the region, proves unequivocally that achieving peace is contingent upon ending the Israeli occupation and allowing the Palestinian people to exercise its inalienable right to self-determination and to establish its independent state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, according to international resolutions, relevant initiatives, including and most notably, the Arab Peace Initiative. Over the past few years, the region has seen a destructive war that led to the martyrdom and injury of tens of thousands. It led to displacement, destruction, destroying families, destroying infrastructure. The region is still reeling from the consequences of this war. There are multiple war fronts, there are multiple hotspots, there are multiple escalation points. They now include more territories, additional countries. The price is paid by other peoples and other countries that are far away from the Middle East. Madam President, the Palestinian territories has been witnessing appalling atrocities that systematically destroyed every aspect of life and affected people, territories, and infrastructure. Lebanon is witnessing tragedies and additional Nakbas. The world bears a specific responsibility, and the United Nations, and this Council specifically, bears a double responsibility as the body responsible for maintaining international peace and security. Madam President, multiple countries has made mediation efforts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, including the US, Egypt, Qatar, and peace plan in Gaza. However, these efforts must be supported by the Council. The Council must keep abreast with these developments in order to implement these agreements to achieve peace and security and to stop the bloodshed, as the people are paying the true price. Madam President, peace is not a luxury, it's an absolute necessity and a strategic choice, but it cannot be imposed by force. It can only be achieved by coordinating collective efforts, by relying on preventive diplomacy, and by approaching these crises rationally. We must be guided by wisdom and dialogue. Mediation is the only way to settle disputes in a region that has been suffering from conflicts for decades. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Mauritania for your statement. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of the Sisterly Republic of Venezuela. Thank you very much, Madam President. The United Nations continues to be the cornerstone of multilateralism that emerged after the Second World War and the main forum for dialogue between sovereign states. All positions that move away from these principles enshrined in San Francisco in 1945 weaken both international law as well as genuine multilateral cooperation. A just and stable international order should be based on sovereign equality of states, respect for the territorial integrity, non-interference in domestic affairs, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. It's only through multilateralism that it's possible to strengthen developing countries, promote fairer participation in global governance, and to make progress in overcoming the historic injustices arising from colonialism and the various forms of subordination of the sovereignty of peoples. Madam President, the Middle East is a region that is very strategically important for global stability. Its importance for stability is particularly clear if we look at the repercussions of the current conflict is having on international peace and security. A significant part of the world energy supply, as well as international important trade routes, go through the maritime routes of the region, and that's why any escalation of tensions has consequences that go beyond regional borders and affect the international community. Peace and security in the Middle East, therefore, is a shared interest shared by all states, and therefore the lasting solutions can only be achieved through dialogue, negotiation, and the diplomatic mechanisms provided for under international law. International peace and security cannot be built on force or by denying the legitimate rights of peoples. Likewise, we cannot forget the importance of the security of other states and the rights of peoples to live in peace and dignity. In conclusion, Venezuela would like to reiterate its commitment that it's only diplomacy and a culture of peace that is based on justice and respect for international law can contribute to sustainable peace in the Middle East and prevent an escalation with regional or global consequences. That being the case, we reject the use or the threat of use of force in the region, and we would call upon all the parties to resume dialogue and multilateral diplomacy in strict adherence with the spirit and the letter of the United Nations Charter. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Muchísimas gracias por su intervención.
Thank you very much to the representative of Venezuela for her statement. Thank you very much. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.